Oh, community.
Community.
Community is...
What's it mean to have community?
I don't even know. Community is such a hard word now.
It seems to be the thing that everyone is chasing, but very few people know how to be a part of anymore. You know, it's a place where you experience life with one another and know you're accepted.
We need community.
If you're not known, you cannot be loved.
But we're definitely coming at this from different places.
Well, welcome back to the Grounded Presence Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Powell. You know what I miss most right now? I've been missing going to the movies. Been missing date night. Now, I've heard this rumor that you can rent out an entire theater for $100 and just have a private showing for you and whoever you invite. You know, that sounds fun. But it's just not the same as going to the movies and having that collective experience. So two of my favorite movies of all time are the Bill and Ted series, Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey. And if you have an opinion on those movies, I'm going to go against the grain a little bit because my favorite's Bogus Journey. Everybody loves Excellent Adventure, but Bogus Journey holds a very special place in my heart. So it killed me a few months ago when the third installment of the franchise gets released and I can't even go and see it in theaters. It's the first movie that I've ever bought a digital copy of online. But the most recent Bill and Ted came out, I think 30 years ago. So the third installment gets released during the pandemic. I mean, talk about bad timing. So I love going to the movies. But my wife loves it even more than I do. She gets into the whole ritual of it. We go to the theater, get the popcorn, get a soda, sneak in some candy, spending way too much money, and then sitting in the dark for a few hours. And me, being the cheap ass that I am, I've never bought concessions at the theater before I met my wife. It's a compromise that I've had to make for the sake of the relationship. But, I get to enjoy the benefits of it too. Man, but it still hurts every time I see that $9 for popcorn get handed over. But my favorite parts of the whole endeavor are picking the seats. I like to be somewhere in the middle, just in that perfect position, right in the center, where the sound is just perfect. The other part I really like about going to the movies is after the movie. And the opportunity that you have, to talk about the film as you're walking out of the theater. And when we're just watching movies at home, it's something that doesn't usually occur when we're sitting on the couch. At least not to the same extent. So in this time of pandemic, I've realized that this whole thing of going to the theater, seeing the movie, getting the popcorn, getting the soda, driving home after the movie, it's one big ritual. It's this set of events that really deepens the experience of any film. And it becomes more than just watching a movie. It becomes an entire event. And this whole event, it really deepens, like I said, the experience of the film, but it also deepens the interactions between my wife and I. It's what a good ritual should do. And I love good ritual. And as someone who's walked away from religion, this word ritual, it's kind of got a bad rap. But I've really come to love the word ritual. Because good ritual, it just takes an experience to a whole nother level. And at its most basic form, it's just a sequence of pre-planned events with the intent of intensifying an experience. And it's really a shame when ritual is implemented by, churches and organizations with their own agendas. And ritual is used to propagate a belief rather than simply inviting the people involved into a deeper awareness of themselves and their surroundings. I've seen rituals used in both ways, the good and the bad way. And so on the show today, that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to dive into not only ritual, but we're going to dive into some church ritual. And I've got a conversation with someone named Fran Pratt And Fran's a pretty cool individual. She's taken the call and response prayers that are usually used in more traditional liturgical churches, and she's put her own unique and a bit more open-minded spin on that spoken form. And she's offered her work as a ritual to the communities she's been involved in, as well as many other communities around the world. It's cool stuff. I appreciate it. And it's all geared towards creating space for people to be more authentic together in a collective setting. Now, her mechanism does use religious language, but she wields it in a much different way than many people do. And I think you'll dig the conversation. And as with the past few conversations I've put out, this is another one from the archives that's taken me a little bit of time to release. And we originally had this conversation a year ago, November 2019, once again, pre-corona world, when when there were not yet any restrictions at all imposed on large gatherings such as those that you would do in churches. Well, Fran Pratt, welcome to the Grounded Presence podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Now, you also go by this moniker, the Litanist.
Oddly enough, I do, yes.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think I made it up.
Cool.
I think I've determined that I made it up. I've never heard anyone else use that term before, but I think it's my own. If it isn't, well, there's nothing new under the sun.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
So a litanist, that's formally the person that guides liturgy at a church, right?
Well, no, I use it more to refer to only myself and my personal work, which is that I write litanies, by which I mean congregational or communal call and response prayers that are often used in a church. And I am one of the main liturgists at my particular church. But I'm working in a broader scope than just one church. I'm writing liturgies / litanies that are used by folks all over the world.
It's really cool. I really like your work, and you have this book out that's called Call and Response, Litanies for Congregational Prayer.
Yes, I do. Thank you for mentioning it. It's available on Amazon.
I think that's so cool because a long time ago, I was a part of a community that did a little bit of liturgy, and they used the Book of Common Prayer. When I was still very into the religious side of Christianity, I picked up a copy of the Book of Common Prayer, and it was kind of like, this doesn't really make sense to me. It's a lot better in the context of a service or whatever. But reading through your work, it's just like a new, fresh take on that, and I dig it.
Thanks. I think that is my intent, to write prayers that harken back to the Book of Common Prayer, but that are sort of in a more modern, colloquial vernacular, and that speak to current events, and also that can be used in a variety of traditions. So the Book of Common Prayer is used in liturgical and mainline Christian traditions, but I'm hoping that I can write things that'll be appealing to folks from a variety of faith traditions, mostly within Christianity, although I do write some interfaith litanies, and then more personal, like prayers that you would use in your personal meditations or devotion time, or however you want to call it.
Yeah, and that's totally what I get from all your work. It's there's this very spiritual side to it, but it uses that Christian language, and it's really cool stuff.
Thanks.
I think a lot of people hear, litany or liturgy. You mentioned the liturgist, and that's the word I was thinking of. That's the person who stands up front and gives the liturgy, right, or kind of guides it. The liturgist.
Yeah, it works in various ways in various traditions and in various communities. But yeah, I do advocate. I tell people that I think every community should have a liturgist in their community who's really paying attention, who has their ear to the ground of what are folks dealing with, what is happening in the world that we need to be able to articulate and lean into together.
What you're saying there, I think something I read by Henry Nouwen. A good preacher or a good pastor isn't like somebody who knows what to say, but they know how to speak what's going on in the community to a point where the community hasn't been able to voice it.
Yeah,
But
well,
like,
that's
that
actually a
kinda
great
sounds like
definition of a liturgist.
the
Yeah.
liturgist. Like they kind of put a voice to everything that's under the surface.
Yeah, and help people awaken to things that are maybe, like you say, under the surface. And a lot of times the things that are happening in the world are very overwhelming, and not everybody can easily put words around these very big, overwhelming issues. And not that I have a corner on the market on that ability or doing that. I don't. But I do. I'm just a words processor, and I'm a contemplative, and I'm a person who sits and thinks about things and figures out how to say things. My hope and intent is to be helpful with that, with these large-scale societal issues, like large-scale problems and evils and wars, and like ways that we're recognizing that we've fallen short in terms of justice and, caring for the vulnerable. I'm interested in being helpful and offering us ways to do communal ritual around those issues. They're prayers, but they're also poems.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of people hear like litany and liturgy, and their mind automatically goes to this place of religious dogma and like indoctrination, especially if you've never like experienced it in a rich form. But that's just not the energy I get from your work. And as I've made my way through your book, it just seems like you use the religious language, but your aim is a bit more of creating this introspective space.
Yeah, I'm hoping to help us become more vulnerable, and yeah, I think I do use some, like, in some cases, in some litanies, some traditional liturgical language or traditional psalmic language, and even wider scriptural kind of language. But I really am interested in distilling that down into digestible bites that we can together wrap our minds around and think about together in words that we actually use and speak.
I like that image of distillation.
Yeah.
Instead of like adding a bunch of extra to it, just strike to the core.
Yeah, and I do try to write with as few words as possible. It doesn't always end up being a very few words, but I do, I don't know, if you were to go back and look at like litanies that I wrote in 2015 or 16, you would be able to see a difference in the precision and conciseness and brevity with which I was writing that now, which I write now as opposed to back then. I've honed my craft, I think, over the past several years.
Well, hey, I know that's painstaking because probably from my correspondence with me, you know that I struggle to write non-verbose emails. I'm always like, how do I distill this? And then I get overwhelmed. I'm like, okay,
yeah.
Send, Okay, so litany versus liturgy. What's the difference there?
Well, I don't think there is a difference. I think litany is a type of liturgy. Basically, the word liturgy means the work of the people. Anything can be liturgy if you have the intention of it being liturgy. I mean, I would consider what people do in a football stadium when they go to a game or a sporting event. They follow a certain liturgy. You're going to find some type of liturgy in that setting. People are going to have a certain type of dress on, and they're going to have their faces painted, and they're going to have, there's traditional foods surrounding that ritual, and there are traditional chants surrounding that ritual, and that is a liturgy that people are gathering together and doing. Now, typically when we say liturgy, we mean it in the context of a church service, but I think of it way more broadly than that. I think of song lyrics as liturgy. I think of my morning coffee as liturgy. For sure, my own personal spiritual practice, I think of as personal liturgy, like part of the work that I do each day to foster, to help create space for my own spiritual growth and depth and awareness of the divine. So I think of liturgy as very broad. So litany is not quite so broad. By litany, what I mean is poetic prayer that we read to ourselves in a personal setting, or better yet, that we say out loud together in some sort of communal setting, be it a church, be it some sort of small group, be it, dinner, it doesn't matter, whatever context that you use it in. So that's kind of how I think of the difference between litany and liturgy, but litany is a type of liturgy.
Okay, cool. Now, I really dig that you just talked about the liturgy of a football game. Like, if you can find liturgy in a football game, I think we're going to get along just fine. Like, I'm not a sports fan, but I appreciate the, just being able to kind of see liturgy as broader than just the church.
Yeah, so I'm not a sports fan either, but I think if we open our eyes, we see the liturgies that are all around us, that we do and that are unspoken or we don't necessarily talk about from that framework. But when we start to put the word liturgy on it, then we automatically seem to, at least, I observe us getting more intentional. Well, what are we doing here? And why are we doing it? How is it meaningful? And what need is it serving in our souls? So I do believe that, I think I don't give a fig about college football. I don't care about it at all. But I do think that it is serving a need that people have for communal ritual. And particularly, I think in this society of a westernized, industrialized, and largely Protestant or post-Protestant, which you might identify with that we suffer from a lack of ritual.
Yeah.
I think humans need a ritual to be able to process change and transition. And how do we process evil? Well, ritual is a great tool. And I think we're suffering because we don't have enough ritual in our lives that applies to our more inner lives.
No, I totally agree with you. And that's like my big conundrum and like a really big drive behind this podcast series is just like how in like a post-Christian state, just in a post-Christian phase of life, maybe like how do you build ritual that will build deep community? How do you build that liturgy and like how, it's just really exploring that whole thing.
Yeah, which I think is really important, and I think it's really important for human thriving. And if you were to ask any trained or qualified anthropologist, they would probably be able to talk to you about ancient human rituals and ways that humans went about, like marking seasons, marking the phases of the moon, marking the harvest, marking various festivals at different times of the year. Then we could talk about how ancient cultures marked human development. Like one that comes to mind is a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, of like ushering someone who is a child into adulthood, and we mark that transition with a ritual or a series of rituals, or maybe like a Native American vision quest ritual of ushering young people into adulthood. And things like that, we've lost largely in Western tradition. And we've also lost rituals of release, of letting go. Like, I find ritual to be very helpful, especially when I want to release anger, old anger or resentment, or move into a new behavior pattern and let go of an old behavior pattern that's not serving me anymore. I find ritual to be a really helpful and healthy tool for helping me mark changes and mark intentions in my own personal life. And I think that's a compelling question of, where are we putting all our angst and our anger, and how are we letting go of things and marking that? So I find that a very compelling question.
What does your ritual for releasing anger look like? I'm so curious now that you've brought it up.
Well, I think that can be done a number of ways. So I think of ritual in terms of a physical act, a physical work of some type that symbolizes an inner work or an intangible work. So let's say I'm realizing that I'm moving into a new phase of life and I need to release some old anger, like you say. Well, I might write on a piece of paper in the company of some witnesses, some trusted friends. I might write that down on a piece of paper and then I might burn it in a fire as a symbolic way of letting that go from dust to dust, of releasing and letting it go and letting it become no longer a part of me. That's just an example. Other people like to use water. I have one friend in particular who, when she lets things go, she likes to stuff it into a little piece of bread. She likes to write a little on a paper, some little slip of paper, and then stuff it into a piece of bread and toss it out on the water, as sort of hearkening back to the scripture of toss your bread up on the waters. So it's whatever, that's just an example. I think ritual is a huge topic. Like it depends on your personality and what kind of circles you run in and what's your history. It depends on what resonates with your soul to help you make this transition or this change. And so I guess going back to litany and the art form that I spend, I guess, the most time on creating for the world is litany is my small offering into the toolkit of communal and collective ritual. So it's something that we do with our bodies, with our vocal cords and our breath that symbolizes an internal intention or change. And so we say, okay, well, we're going to open up this book and we're going to say these words aloud together in a very intentional and meditative and contemplative and possibly, if you're the type to pray, a prayerful way.
I think that's probably the most, I like that you brought that meditative to it because, so often litany, liturgy, like that can be viewed as very indoctrinating, and dogmatic. But it really does create that meditative state where you're just, you're doing your morning ritual, right? Like just something that's calming you. You're having your morning coffee and that's gonna help you when you get to work. And, you need to like get into your day. It's like just part of the setup, it's not, I don't know, like forcing a belief necessarily. Sometimes it is, obviously. But, I'm definitely further away from the church than you are.
Oh yeah, sure. Plenty of people are.
Might call me it's Christianity is my tradition. It's my history, but you might call me a non-practicing, non-believing Christian.
Yeah. Okay.
So, anyways, I ordered your book a while back, and I did so with some hesitancy, just because of where I'm at with my tradition. But when your book arrives in the mail, I start leafing through it, and the title of the last litany in the book, it just really catches my eye, and it's the liturgy or the litany for the heretics. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be good.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Would you do us the favor of reading that?
I would love to.
Awesome.
I will begin with a disclaimer that the majority of what I write is call and response, which means there's a leader and then there's a group of people who collectively say the response together. And so that's how they're written, but that doesn't mean they can't be used in other ways. So I'll just be reading to you Litany for the Heretics. I'll
just do
way.
a little overview here of the book. It's like, we look at the table of contents. It's broken down into litanies by purpose, I suppose. You got litanies for looking inward, litanies for looking outward, litanies for coping, litanies for church rituals, litanies for communal worship. Kind of run the whole gamut there. And it's
I tried to. I tried to just make
diverse content.
Yeah, very useful. I wanted it to be a useful tool in our toolkit. And I'm so glad that you're feeding back to me right now, basically, that you didn't feel strong-armed, because it's never my intention to strong-arm any reader or any participant into a particular mindset. I always want to have this loose, open, expansive posture with it. So I'm so glad that you said
I also
that.
flipped to the back and I just said, okay, we're going to get along right away. And, read the rest of it like without a thought, you know what I mean? Or without any skepticism, should I say.
Good.
But yeah,
No,
grace
no
us with
internal
that
resistance.
litany for the heretics.
All right, here we go. Litany for the heretics. God, we lift up to you the courageous souls who go against the grain of the present age, the heretics, the ones who flout religious tradition or expectation, the brave, the ones who offend the powers and principalities, the prophets, the ones who see past the acceptable and into the excellent, the beloved, the ones who do the kingdom work despite resistance, the committed, the ones who sacrifice possessions and reputations for good, the sold out, the ones who speak truth to power, the bold. May their faith never falter, their feet never stumble, their resources never run out, their hope never die. Because they are the ones we need to shake us up and inspire us. They are the ones we need to become the stout-hearted, beautiful heretics, the voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. May the beauty of the good news, the way of God breaking in, so stir and astound and awaken us that we can't help but join them. Amen.
I love that. That's
Thanks.
awesome.
Litany for the heretics in the back of the book.
I just like how you, there just feels like so much space in that. And you mentioned that a little bit ago, just trying to create space, it just feels like there's so much space for everybody wherever they may be on their journey in that.
Well, I'm so glad that you said that because, okay, so I come from the previous faith tradition that I was in before now. There's one particular teacher in that tradition who says songs are a place we go. And I really resonate with that. It's almost like we go to a place and a song creates a space for us to emote something or express something. And I like to think about the litanies working in a similar way of creating a space for us to communally together either access a particular posture or address a particular issue or dig deeply into some aspect of vulnerability or just become more authentic. I love to think about them as moments. This is a moment of space, a moment in which we accomplish something together, in which we do some kind of work together.
I really like that. That's
so
cool. Yeah. No, as you were talking, I was just thinking about how sometimes you go to a church service and it's like the music just puts you in a really good space, And sometimes whatever, the music sucks and you're like, I'm still grumpy, right? But it just kind of sets you up in a more or less receptive manner. If you kind of have these liturgies and these litanies that you can come back to like with every meeting, whether that's a church service or a football game, it kind of reminds you of the good experience and it like creates that movement to push you like further into the experience and be like receptive to it. Yeah, that just washed over me as I was hearing you talk.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's this other, so I don't know. Did you grow up in evangelicalism?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can speak for a broad swath of evangelical tradition. So if I'm not, then pardon me. But we're taught sort of implicitly that prayer is supposed to be the time when we ask the divine for stuff. We ask God to do something or give us something. And we're implicitly taught that, well, the best kind of praying is totally extemporaneous, that you didn't think about beforehand, and that has no other premeditated intention. I've learned not to think of prayer in that way. I've learned to think of it as formation. So the point of me praying at all or interacting with the divine at all is for me to be formed and transformed and changed in some way. this tool is I hope, a formational tool that helps us to pay attention to people outside of ourselves and to work for the benefit of the oppressed and the marginalized and the vulnerable, and to wake up to issues and realities that we'd rather not see because we'd rather stay asleep. I don't know why I went to formation, but that was where my mind went when you said that.
There's a lot in there.
I do this with a lot of
like,
intention. I could talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, no, you just said a lot of real stuff in there. Yeah, you mentioned meditative and all that, and it's like prayer's not the content, but prayer when it's meditative can set you up for a posture of being, which is the content.
There you go. A posture of being. Yeah. That's what prayer is. It's a posture of being. And I consider prayer to be a posture of attention to the divine. The best praying that I can do is to pay attention. The best way that I can ever learn to love anyone is to pay attention to them. You know, that's what Mary Oliver, the poet, she says. Oh, I'm gonna slaughter the quote. Pardon me if I get it not quite right, but I'm gonna get the gist of it, which is, attention is the most basic form of love. And so if you want to love the world, well, you've got to pay attention to it. If you want to love your kid, well, you've got to pay attention to your kid. If you want to love your spouse or your best friend, or, you know, any relationship that you have, or if you want to love your work, you've got to pay attention to it. And if you want to love the divine, and if you want the divine to have any sort of influence in your life, well, you've got to pay attention. Simone Weil says the same thing in a different way. She calls it the rarest and purest form of generosity, which I just take to mean the same thing, that attention is, it's almost as though attention is love pixelated, love down to its tiniest incremental pixels.
That's beautiful.
It is, isn't it? I think it kind of is. Yeah. I've been doing a lot of thinking about that here lately. It's informing a lot of my thought here in the last, I don't know, I guess few months. That idea of attention.
Yeah, what you're saying just like takes me to this whole place that I started this podcast out of. You know, the grounded presence. It's like there's nothing more special than when you're with somebody and they're grounded, like in themselves, and they're present. You know,
yeah.
However you get there, like I don't care. Like I think we just all our world needs more of that.
Yeah, that's, you know, how to be human,
attention.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
it's how to be human. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so back to these litanies, these liturgies. From what I've read of your story, I think I see your work through a similar lens that you created it out of, because I understand that you kind of grew up in a evangelical community and then encountered liturgy in your 20s. Is that right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Late 20s, yeah.
Same thing here. And, you know, in my experience, I encountered it in this, you know, very millennial church. And it was just like, you know, it was in the basement of an old church. They lit a few candles. They did some light liturgy. It wasn't high liturgy or anything. You know, they just recite the Lord's Prayer, the Nicene Creed, and at the end of the service, sing the doxology. What a beautiful song, you know, for a group of people to sing. But yeah, no robes, no hymnals, all that liturgical jazz. But tell me a little bit about your first experience with liturgy.
So my first liturgy came to me in a moment of suffering and of hardship. My spouse and I had been involved, like deeply involved, in a community, a church community. I was a worship pastor there. I was, you know, we had friends with whom we had a great deal of authenticity and vulnerability. And it was sort of one of our first grown-up experiences of that. And so it meant a lot to us. We suddenly had to leave that town just due to logistical issues like job stuff. And it was very painful for us to leave. And I, in particular, you know, I'd felt for the first time in my life like I had a ministry and a calling. which if you grow up in evangelicalism as a young woman who is spiritually bent, but you're told your whole life that you can't do anything because you don't have the right genitalia, to finally come into a place where you're told, oh, we see you that you have leadership capacity, we see that you have a bent towards some sort of spiritual authority. I use that term very loosely. So this was the first time in my life that I encountered any sort of offering of freedom or acceptance for that. So then we had to leave, and I just felt like I had lost everything. I felt like, oh, I'm never gonna have that same sense of meaningful work in my life again. I was just sure that I was done forever. So we went through a couple of years of just pain and sort of mourning the loss of that, and we couldn't really find a community that worked for us or that offered anything similar to what we had had before. And so we were just in a bad mood and had a bad attitude about it. So we find ourselves living in San Francisco, California. And right when we moved there, I was pregnant with our first child at the time. We got there and found ourselves going to a liturgical church simply because it was a half mile from our apartment, and that was as far as I was willing to walk with a big pregnant belly. So we find ourselves in this liturgical church in San Francisco, which there's no like robes, but there are clergy collars. Okay? The denomination was, at least at the time, they were RCA, which is the Reformed Church of America. So anyway, I never experienced liturgy of any kind in my life. Literally none. I mean, the closest to something liturgical I would have ever experienced would have been in a Methodist church. So when I get in there, and I'm sort of this evangelical kind of neo-charismatic person, and I get in there and I'm really sad, and I haven't prayed probably in months because I've just been in a bad mood and mad because I lost, this thing that was so valuable to me, and I was mourning it and grieving it, which is valid, but I was in a bad mood about faith. And so someone hands me a piece of paper that has this beautiful liturgy on it, and there are prayers that are also poems, and they're praying into issues that, I never prayed corporately about homelessness or the government or justice issues of any kind. And I certainly never prayed a creed. I maybe had recited the Lord's Prayer a few times. But here I am holding this paper full of liturgy, and I go, oh, great, I don't have to think about it. Here's a prayer that I can pray when I got nothing. Can't really stand to do anything faithy. I got nothing. I'll pray this. Here it is in front of me. And it kept my spiritual ship from sinking in that season of my life. So that was how I got to liturgy. And then I found myself a few years later, sort of fast forward, back in a more evangelical context, and realizing how much I missed it, how much I missed liturgy, and how much I missed a more contemplative lens on faith. And so I just started doing it in my home by myself. So doing liturgy and doing contemplation and reading Christian mystics and reading other kinds of mystics, Hindu mystics and Buddhist mystics, and just entering into the very long stream of contemplative spiritual tradition. But, going to my evangelical church, and I'm a musician, so I was like leading music, worship, and then I come home and do liturgy. And I started writing liturgy because I wanted us to be able to pray about the war in Syria together. Because I felt very strongly that we should communally and collectively become more aware of what was happening with that there were like these major atrocities happening and people who were suffering and being oppressed, and that we needed to become aware of that. And so that was just sort of the gateway for me into, well, how can we pray about that? Well, so I Google all these prayers, and I'm looking in the Book of Common Prayer, and I can't find anything that works for me, that resonates with my soul, and that I think that my particular evangelical, like quasi non-denominational, very casual congregation could sink their teeth into. So I'm like, well, I got to write it myself. And that was in about 2013. So that was kind of when I started writing my first little forays into litany writing.
So you've been
No,
doing it for about 7, 8 years here?
something like that.
Cool.
6 or 7, yeah.
It just seems like you would have picked up such a unique perspective just on people and communities, giving all these litanies and writing them as well.
Well, I think it has, and I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about the craft. I've learned a lot about what resonates for people. I don't get it right all the time. I write at least a litany every single week, usually 1 or 2. So I certainly don't, not all the litanies are flawless or whatever. Not all of them resonate for everybody, but
So tell me about the best one that you've written and delivered, the one that you're just like, that nailed it, and like it just changes the energy of the room, and it's just like lights it up.
Well, the thing is that I often don't deliver them myself. Often they go out to communities.
So okay, let's flip the coin here. Have you ever seen any of your litanies publicly read that did that for you, or that did that for the room? It was just like, whoa, like something just changed.
Yeah, there've been a few. One that comes to mind in particular is I wrote, I think it was Litany for the Border. If I'm not mistaken, it was Litany for the Border. That was written as a way for communities to address the realities that are happening at the U.S. border right now, which are, it's a terrible humanitarian crisis, and we need to be aware of it. Well, someone sent me a video of a group that was praying at the border wall, some people who had gone down to the border to become more aware, to try to help, and to try to create awareness about the issues there. And they sent me a video of them together collectively praying. I believe it was Litany for the Border. And I was like, when I saw it, I was like, all right, I'm at the pinnacle. Like this is what I've intended it to. This is the art form's intent. It is serving its purpose. Hallelujah. All right, I'm done. I can stop now.
Yeah.
Not really, I'm teasing, but
That's beautiful.
but I did have that sense of like, yes, that one is serving its purpose. Yeah.
I don't know.
I got chills. I don't know those people who prayed. I just saw it on video.
I'm getting the chills right now. Like, that's the pinnacle. You said it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of like just being an artist, and
I don't think you get much better than that.
Really. But that was definitely a moment where I just thought, all right, that is it. That is what this thing is supposed to be accomplishing. So, yeah, there have been a few times of that, but that one really sticks out in my mind. I'll stop there. I'll let that be my cliffhanger.
No, well, thanks so much. That's great, and thanks so much for taking the time today. What's next for you here? Are you planning on publishing any more books in the future?
Oh gosh, yeah, I have several more books in me. I think I have for sure another couple of books of litanies. For now, I'm working on an article that's going to be published by Progressive Spirit. I'm a pastor. I haven't even mentioned that. Have I even said that? I can't remember.
No. No. So are you
staff at a church? Yeah.
I know we're closing in on our time here, but so you're a worship pastor, right?
Yeah, I'm pastor of worship and liturgy at a very progressive, small, semi-liturgical, fairly contemplative-leaning church here in the suburbs of Austin.
Now, do you deliver the liturgies there?
Often I don't. Often I just write them and someone else delivers them. We're a very communal bunch, and so we really value everyone having a hand. We say, look, just because my title is pastor doesn't mean I'm your guru, doesn't mean I do your spiritual work for you. I can't do your spiritual work for you. That's not possible. I can't do that for you. So everybody participates in the life and in the work, the work of the people, the liturgy. So I mostly play music. I preach also. So yeah, it's fun work. Very meaningful.
That church in Texas, did you introduce liturgy to that church? Like, I think I remember reading something that you introduced liturgy to one of the churches that you worked for.
Well, perhaps I perhaps introduced it to my previous church, which was in a more evangelical denomination, and I'm no longer. I don't serve within evangelicalism anymore. I still have tons of friends within evangelicalism, and plenty of evangelicals use my content that I write, but I don't serve directly within evangelicalism anymore. I'm in a much more expansive, progressive context now.
Yeah, I wish we had a little more time, because that sounds like such an interesting social experiment. To like introduce liturgy like to a community that wasn't exposed to it beforehand. Like, that sounds like that would be so interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty fun, actually. And it's not hard. You just have to say something like, hey guys, let's say a prayer aloud together. I'll say the regular type lines and you say the bold lines, and don't be shy. Feel free to speak with gusto, and we'll do this together. It's a prayer, but it's also a poem. That's literally how I will introduce a litany if I'm in a space that isn't accustomed to doing that sort of thing. Hey, it's just a prayer, but it's also a poem. Let's say it together out loud. It'll be fun. Cool. Yeah.
I bet that was fun to watch the whole experience evolve.
Yeah, and not it doesn't resonate with everybody. It's fine. It doesn't resonate with everybody.
Well, hey, I know we got to cut it here, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I had a great time talking to you today.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's it. You can find Fran Pratt and her work at franpratt.com. A link is in the show notes. I'll catch you right back here in 2 weeks. And until next time, stay safe out there, stay sane, and stay curious.